Kristen, and you're listening to Podcast and Amplify, a podcast for women entrepreneurs who want to amplify their voice and brand through podcasting and grow a wildly successful business. I'm the executive producer and host of 2 shows and an entrepreneur, and I love helping women grow their visibility, mindset, and business to the next level. Each week, I share tips on how to launch and leverage your podcast, and I'm bringing on the very best business leaders to give you advice on how to build your business empire. Let's amplify your voice and business. Hey there, listeners. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Kristen Quiros-Bayona, and today we're going to be talking about the secret superpowers that make introverts great podcasters. And I'm really excited to talk about this because this might sound a little narcissistic, but I love introverts. I am an introvert, but introverts, highly sensitive people, empaths, these are my people. I completely understand how we move through the world, and I know my own experience becoming a podcaster and how much I love podcasting and using this medium to amplify my voice. And I really wanted to talk about this more in depth, obviously, because I'm an introvert and I love deep conversations. But I wanted to get into this a little bit more. So let me back up. In 2021, I wrote a blog post about the 6 traits that introverts naturally have that make them great at podcasting. And I did a podcast episode on it in season 1. And I love that content. And then more recently, I was interviewed on a podcast for a client, and she works with introverts, highly sensitive people, empaths. Those are her clients, and that's who her podcast is targeted towards. And so she was so gracious to invite me onto her show as one of her early guests. I was really honored to be invited and to go on the show. We had this really great conversation, and she got me thinking about this topic again. And I realized I have more to say about it. So here we are. And I wanted to dive into this a little bit more, like I said, because I know that as introverts, we are constantly looking for ways to kind of move through the world that feels good. And part of that as a business owner is sharing our voice and amplifying our message in a way that feels good. And that can be a little tricky for us because we do live in what I feel like is a very extroverted centric world. And I think we get a lot of messaging around how we are naturally isn't okay, isn't quote unquote right. So for someone like me, who's an introvert, who has found a medium that just feels so aligned and so good when I'm using this platform and how I'm able to use it and how it lends into my strengths, I think that's something worth exploring. And I'm all about empowering people to use their voices in different ways. But today's show is dedicated to my introverts, my highly sensitive people, and my empaths. If you are an extrovert and you're listening to this, or you're an ambivert, I think it's still valuable to listen to because, at least for myself, I attract people who are complementary to me. So, for example, my husband is an extrovert, and I think our dynamic together is actually really strong because we have different strengths. And I'm sure you extroverts and ambiverts listening have introverts in your lives. So if you want to understand them a little bit more, I would encourage you to listen to this episode as well. So for those who don't know, the definition of introverts, we have a lower dopamine threshold. So that really just means that our brain is more aroused by dopamine than others. So it doesn't take a lot for us to feel the effects of dopamine. We need very low stimuli to feel our feelings, to feel happy, to feel calm, to feel engaged. And so when we are highly aroused, which happens more easily for us, then we can tend to feel stressed. So that's why we don't like big crowded rooms. We don't necessarily like parties. We like the more one-on-one intimate scenarios, conversations. Things like speaking in front of groups can tend to be kind of terrifying because it's just so much coming at us. And so we really just need that extra time to recharge. And that's why we are okay with being alone. And we typically have what I've heard described as really rich inner worlds. And I love that description because it's so true. We have really great imaginations, we think a lot, we analyze. That's just a little breakdown of the introvert and kind of what that looks like to move through the world as an introvert for those of you listening who might not be an introvert. So first of all, why podcasting? Why this medium? I want to quickly go over sort of your 3 different options for getting attention, amplifying your voice in the online space. So what that looks like today is social media, traditional thought leadership, like publishing a book or speaking, and podcasting. If we think about social media, what I constantly feel like is I'm not an entertainer. So I see people doing reels and it's like, wow, you're really good at that. I am not an entertainer. So that doesn't feel comfortable to me. And it really feels like a place that is meant for distraction. Not that I don't use it as sort of like a storefront for my business, but I don't think there's a lot of room to have nuanced, in-depth content there or conversations with people. So that can feel a little off for introverts because we love the more in-depth, thoughtful interactions. And so then if you think about the traditional thought leadership, like publishing a book or doing public speaking can be a challenge because a lot of us tend to be wallflowers. We like to observe and not be observed. And that can be a bit of a hurdle to overcome. I know for me, it was a challenge. It's been a challenge, but podcasting has really helped me learn how to use my voice, learn how to speak on topics that are really meaningful to me. If you think about publishing a book, promoting your book, that requires being in front of a lot of people and speaking to a lot of people. And not all introverts have problems with public speaking, but I think most of us do have that sort of knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, that is not comfortable. That's not where I want to be. So that's why I've thrown in this 3rd category of podcasting, because it's like this happy medium where you get to share your voice in a deep, meaningful way. You can speak on something for 30 to 60 minutes and really get your point across. You can get your personality across. You can make that connection. It's not like a 9-second reel where, it's not a quick fix. You can get a lot more content out there that will connect with people. And yet it's not, spending months or a year writing a book. You can produce a podcast episode in a few hours and then distribute it to so many people within, a short amount of time. And I also have to say that introverts tend to be perfectionists and we tend to feel sort of sensitive around feeling judged. It's what prevents us from raising our hand in a meeting because we just have this fear of like saying the wrong thing or it not being perfect. And I'm definitely a recovering perfectionist. I think I did an episode on that, and it's something that you really should unpack. There's a lot of worthiness wrapped up in perfectionism, but we tend to lean towards that. And the podcasting gives you that space where you don't have to be sort of like perfect or, do it perfect because you're not live, right? So you have that buffer where you can record yourself listen back and you just have that space to like, okay, well, do I want to edit this? Is this how I want it to sound? And that's something that's really important for introverts because, we are very thoughtful, we're very intentional. And especially if we have the perfectionism quality, we kind of want to make sure we get something right before we put it out there. And not that it has to be perfect, but it does give you that space and where we're kind of comfortable having the little bit of control of like, okay, I want to listen to this before I put it out into the world, which I think is okay. I think as long as you're not nitpicking and thinking, oh, this has to be perfect, then I think that's it's an okay place to be where you want it to be good. And you want to make sure that you sound good and you're not sort of wasting anyone's time by putting something out there that it will be hard to listen to. So I know for me, what I told myself from the very beginning was they're only going to get better. Like every episode I do is only going to get better. And that took a lot of pressure off. So that's a little bit of a side note. I want to jump into the superpowers, talking about our natural innate qualities that really lend to being great at podcasting. So, first of all, we are really good at nuance, right? We are natural observers. We pick up on those details. We're often looking for those subtleties, especially in like conversations, actually in all areas. I know for myself, when I'm speaking with people, am I trying to really listen to what they're saying and pick up on the nuance, the subtlety of their story or their message? But I find myself doing that when I'm looking at a piece of art, when I'm reading a book, when I'm out in nature, like I'm really looking. And I think that's what makes a lot of us creative, makes a lot of us artistic. We just kind of have this sort of hyper focused lens that we see the world through. And that for a lot of us comes very naturally. Okay, so the second superpower I want to talk about is our empathy and our emotional intelligence. So we often are really great at sensing other people's emotions. And we also have the ability to imagine what someone else might be thinking or feeling. So it's not only sensing what they're actually feeling, but we can think about, use our emotions and sort of intuit, what is that person feeling right now? And that's something that we just naturally do. For me, it's not something I can turn off. When I walk into a room, I am constantly trying to read people. And that's part of the reason why, being in an open office environment can be really hard for introverts because you don't have any buffers. And if you can visually see everyone, that's kind of like you're reading everyone. It's like if you can see someone, you're most likely reading them. So it can be a little bit challenging, but it can also be a real gift because you want to know how people are feeling, and that leads to connection, right? And as far as emotional intelligence, because we're empathetic, that very much leads into being able to communicate effectively. We understand our own emotions and we're able to regulate those and manage those. And when our emotional intelligence is really spot on, that's when we're, like I said, able to empathize with others and diffuse conflicts and just really communicate. Okay, so the last superpower I want to talk about is our thoughtfulness. So some would say our over thoughtfulness because introverts tend to really overthink, and that definitely has its positive and negatives. Sometimes you can go into the unhealthy overthinking, which is ruminating. But on the other end of the spectrum, that overthinking is what helps us be really considerate of other people's needs. And it's what allows us to really be considerate and pay attention. So all of these things, that being able to pick up on nuance, being empathetic, having that emotional intelligence, being really thoughtful, these things all really work together and build on one another. And I see them as very intertwined. And those things intertwined are so powerful. They're such a strength. And so that's why I wanted to kind of tease out each one. But I think you can see, as I talk about how these superpowers, you can leverage these in podcasting, you'll see how they work together. But I wanted to just break them down individually at first so you can see, just how they are as they stand on their own. But I really do think that they all work together to be really massive strengths. Okay, so how can you use these strengths as a podcaster? Because you are an empathetic, emotionally intelligent, thoughtful person who picks up on nuance. I mean, what a powerhouse. That's why I think that introverts should definitely do interviews. And I think solo shows like these are really great because when you're talking about something that lights you up, that's really going to come through because you've thought about this topic and you really wouldn't be talking about it unless it meant something to you. And so when you're talking about something that you're deeply connected to, it's connected to your mission and your values. That's what people are going to hear in your voice and they're going to respond to it. So solo episodes are really great. And interviewing people, I think, is just such a great way to leverage all of those strengths because when you're speaking with someone, you're going to use all of those strengths. So you're going to use your emotional intelligence to communicate effectively with that person, to try to read them. You're going to use that empathy and you're going to listen to the subtleties in their stories, in their message, and you're going to tease out those things that are, worth bringing out that maybe not everyone would think to pull out because maybe they're not paying as careful attention as you are because going back to really being a thoughtful person and, think about the questions that you write and how much thought will go into that. When you're doing your research, you're looking for the subtleties and the nuance in this person's story and this person's brand. It will help you assess, is this the right fit? Because you're thinking deeply about these things. And then when you have the interview, circling back to the interview, that empathy is just so important because that is helping you connect with this person. And all of that works to create a really great experience, not just for you, not just for your guests, but for your audience. So all these things work together to create just a really great overall experience. And these are things that you already naturally do. This is just who you are in a lot of ways. And that's really why I wanted to talk about this topic, because I know we're always looking for ways that we can show up fully as ourselves. And when I say fully, I mean fully owning ourselves. And that's the real path to having a successful business. For me, how I define success is, can I show up in a way that honors me so that I can put my best foot forward? And when I'm doing that, that means I'm attracting other people and inspiring other people and empowering other people to do the same, to own their life and to be fully who they are and accept who they are. And for me, that's a really important value of mine, and it's part of my mission. So we talked about how those superpowers all kind of work together to create a really powerful podcast. Interviewing people, I think, is fantastic. Creating content that lights you up, I think, is just something that really comes naturally to us. And when we do it, people see it and they really respond. This is also where creating a podcast that's deeply connected to your values and your mission is super important. And it's something that kind of comes easy to us because it's hard for us to do things, at least for myself, it's hard for me to do things I don't feel deeply connected to. And when you're sharing your voice, like you're literally your voice, it's so, so important. And you always want to connect your brand, your business back to your core why you're doing this. Something else about podcasts that are really great for introverts is that it allows you to honor your natural rhythm, your natural flow. And if you think about it, everything has a rhythm, everything has a flow, from our heartbeat to the cycles of the moon to the seasons. And so being able to have a seasonal podcast like I do gives me that ability to recharge, like I talked about in the very beginning of this episode, that we really need time to recharge. And so having this format honors our capacity to create and then rest and then do it all over again, and being able to set what that looks like is really aligned with how an introvert operates, how we need the stimulus and then the recharge time. And it's a really great way to sort of protect our nervous system. And then going back to creating content that connects deeply with your audience, grows an aligned community. This is where being empathetic can really help you to think about your own growth and learnings, and to create content from that really helps your audience to feel seen, to feel heard in the problems or the growth that they're having. So I have the Captivate and Convert journaling prompts, and that's where every month my subscribers get journal prompts to think about their growths, their learnings, their accomplishments for the month, and then turn those journaling responses into content that is meaningful, because you're talking about your own experience. You're talking about something that is personal, yet you're universal. And you're talking about personal development, which is really powerful. And to connect your experience to someone else who's probably through something similar is a great way to have an authentic connection with your listeners. And like I said, to help them feel seen in their journey as well. And because you're an empathetic person, you're going to be someone who can sit down and be really self-reflective and truly self-aware, write your responses, and then think about how those experiences could help someone else. So your ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to connect the dots from your experience to perhaps their struggle or their problem, is something that's going to come really easy to you. So I encourage you to do something like journaling and reflecting on your own growth and using that as a starting point, and turn that into really powerful content like a podcast episode. And whether it's with my journal prompts that I send you and Captivate and Convert or not, but this is a great place to start. And I'll link that in the show notes. But that's how I come up with a lot of my topics. Like, for example, this podcast episode, I was interviewed on that podcast. I thought about how much fun I had talking about this topic, and it really lit me up. And I thought, oh, I can create a podcast episode around that. And it not just that it lit me up, but I felt like it was an opportunity to speak to a group of people who I just really identify with, and I really love other introverts, and I can support them in a meaningful way. Just wanted to share that personal example of what that looks like for me. And that's all I've got for this episode. I hope that this was inspiring, empowering, helped you see all the strengths that you already have within you that you can tap into to become a podcaster, and why podcasting will feel really good for you. And for me, that's what it's all about these days, is what am I doing in my business that feels really good? And I'm really trying to focus on doing things that light me up. And this episode has really done that. So I hope that you enjoyed it as well. And if you want to get access to Captivate and Convert, I will leave a link in the show notes so you can sign up there. If you really liked this episode and you know of other aspiring podcasters or introverts, highly sensitive people, empaths, go ahead and share this episode with them. That is the best way to support our show. I just found a really great podcast and I shared it with like 6 of my friends and they've all listened to it. And the power of personal referrals, getting suggestions from people that you know and you like and you respect is the best way to help this show grow. So please do share with your community and anyone who you think would find value in this show. And I appreciate every single one of you for listening. Thank you for spending some time with me today, and I will see you in the next episode. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe so you don't miss a show. And rating and reviewing this podcast is the best way to help support us. Always remember, your voice and what you have to offer is needed in the world. Until next week, take care.